I'm Edwin Ellis, and I'm a professor at the University of Alabama. And in this video, we're going to take a look at some of the tools that you can find on the Make Sense Strategies Toolkit that might actually be helpful to you do various things in your role as a school counselor. And so what we're going to be looking at are what are called smart sheets for students. And these are tools that you can use when you're working with students to do things like focus on behavior literacy, which is when you're helping students try to understand behavior and what happens. When you're working on character building, perspective taking, self-control, and goal setting and self-advocacy. Likewise, there's some smart sheets for teachers, and these focus primarily on behavior analysis. And so these are not things we'll be sharing with students, but rather they're exclusively for teachers. So the smart sheets for students are really used when you're teaching behavior and social literacy. And they're also really good when you do things like conduct life-space interviews, where you're trying to help the student understand what happened and why it happened. You can also use these when you're supporting teachers that are implementing social and behavior interventions. And so this is the home page of the Make Sense Strategies Toolkit, and where we're focusing on is this specific area right here. And so these are where you'll find the smart sheets for students. And so you can see we have a category of behavior literacy, character building, perspective taking, self-control, and goal setting. And so in part one, we're going to be focusing on the smart sheets for students, and then in the follow-up video in part two, we're going to be looking at the ones for teacher in terms of behavior analysis. So to get started with part one, the behavior literacy smart visuals are really designed not for influencing behavior in the sense of enforcing and reinforcing behavior and that sort of thing, but rather this is when you're just trying to teach students about behavior and help them understand behavior and what's going on. So for an example, if I click on, or if you click on behavior literacy, what will open up is this page. Now, first thing I want to point out is if you see this 1 and 2, if you click on 2, that will open up another page of these. And so what you can see is that there are a variety of different graphic organizer type devices, but they all are designed to do different things related to behavior literacy. So for an example, this one is all about what happened. This is when then, so kind of reactions. This one focuses on understanding behavior, who owns the problem, and things of that nature. Now, some of these are going to be more appropriate for little kids and some for more middle school and high school kids. And of course, it's up to you to determine what's developmentally appropriate and what's the nature of the objective you're going for. Okay. So for an example, if I click on the color one of this, what will open up is a Word document that's this particular visual. And now these are interactive, which means you can type on these and save them. And so there are different ways of using this particular smart visual. One is when you're teaching students about general concepts like what happens when you lie, or what are the consequences of stealing, or what are the consequences of being kind, sort of general principles. But you can also use these as a life space interview when you're sort of helping the student unpack a crisis or something that happened, and helping them see the chain reaction of how a series of events caused other events, and so forth and so on. And so this is a way of sort of slowing down the whole process and allowing you to, in a very concrete way, help students see relationships between actions and consequences and so forth. So here's an example of how that looks. Let's say we're focusing on the sort of general principle of stealing, and we're just teaching students about the importance or why stealing is such a relevant concept. Which basically means taking something that doesn't belong to us without permission. And so for an example, you want something that belongs to somebody else, and you take it without permission and you keep it. That's stealing. So what happens is then other people think you're dishonest because you steal things from them, and they won't trust you. And so then what happens is they won't let you borrow their things because they're afraid you won't give them back. And they like you less because they're afraid you're going to steal from them. And you'll have less friends, and you'll be left out and not be included in things. So what's important to understand about this? Stealing is wrong, and it leads to bad things. Now, this is just sort of a simple application of just teaching about the principles associated with stealing and the consequences of it. And again, but you can also use these to unpack a particular crisis in terms of what was the chain or series of events that happened. Okay, now this one is another example of the behavior literacy smart visuals. And so, for an example, this is all about when people do this particular behavior, then others react this way, so we need to. Okay, now students verbally hear this, or we often verbalize this information to students, but putting it on a graphic organizer sometimes makes it much more concrete and does it in such a way that students are more likely to get it and retain the information. So for example, when people do this, here's how this works. So when people do not listen when others are speaking, then others usually react by feeling annoyed or angry, and they're unable to share an important thought. Thus, we need to listen while others are speaking and wait patiently for our turn to speak. So this just sort of illustrates a very concrete way, when, then, and so kind of interaction. This is one of my favorite, and this is all about taking a problem and understanding what's going on with the problem. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll identify what would be a good name for this problem. And then we'll identify words that we can use to describe the problem. And then identify what the problem, how the problem makes you, what it makes you think about, or how it makes you feel. And so we'll kind of get those words out. And then words, if spoken out loud, make the problem bigger. So everybody thinks some of those words, but if you speak them out loud and everybody hears them, then the problem gets even worse. Actions that might help solve the problem, and actions that will probably make the problem worse. Now this is an example of a simple when-then type of thing, and you can use this when helping students unpack basic rules, social rules, and things of that nature. And so for an example, the rule is to be positive, respectful, and helpful in a productive group member. And so the big picture is when I'm positive and respectful, helpful, and productive, then the whole group works better and we'll reach our goals. And then these are examples. So for an example, when I need to complete an assignment outside of meetings, then I need to make time to get the work done and ask others for help if I need it before it's due. When I need to be on time for meetings, then I need to make sure that other activities don't interfere with me getting to the meeting on time, and so forth. So again, these are just more concrete ways of sort of anchoring basic social and behavior principles that we're trying to teach students. Character building, just to give you a couple of examples of that. If we click here, it'll open this page, and there's some different tools that we can use. The one I want to focus on is the ASN self-respect. Okay, now ASN stands for always, sometimes, and never. And so we can unpack a concept such as self-respect, and we're going to identify what is it about. And so, for example, it's about having pride and belief in yourself and potential for success, and accepting responsibility for your actions. Now, under always, what we're going to think of are what are some words that always describe self-respect, or what always happens when you have it. So for an example, you always recognize your strengths and you use them to achieve your goals. You always recognize your weaknesses and try to strengthen them. You always value and have pride in your heritage and your culture, and you always seek challenges and you set goals and pursue them. Sometimes others will try to attack your self-respect by saying or doing things that bring you down. Sometimes your self-respect will vary during the day depending on your experiences, and sometimes others may not value the same things you value. Never do you believe that you'll fail at everything you do. Never do you focus only on your weaknesses or bad experiences. Never do you try to build your self-respect by disrespecting others. And so what? Respecting yourself will cause others to respect you more. Now, this is an example of, while I've sort of showed you these various prompts on here, I won't actually take students through this because I've constructed it, but rather as we are discussing what self-respect means and so forth, and I'm pulling this information out of the student and sort of guiding that response, then we'll record them on these as we're doing these kinds of interactions with them. Okay, here's another one from the character building, and this is kind of simple but cool. And so things I like about, and so what we'll do is we'll identify various peers and identify various things we like about that person. It's sort of self-explanatory. In terms of perspective taking, this is all about helping students recognize the fact that different people will see the same thing through a very different set of lenses sometimes. And there's several of these that you can use to help students. Some of these are more middle school and high school oriented kinds of tools. They're really not for very young children. But for an example, one of these is called the problem IAI, or influence, action, and impact. And so you have a problem, and what is the problem about? And these are factors that influence perceptions of the problems. In other words, things that make you view the problem in certain ways. These are actions that result from the problem and impact of the problem on us. And so what are the implications? Now, obviously, that's going to be more of an older kid type of tool that you would use. This is multiple perspectives web, and so you have a topic or something that happens, and you're going to have lots of different people who are going to view that same thing very differently. So for an example, let's say you're doing a problem with, say, using cell phones in class. And so you might have different students, teachers, principals, and different people who have very different perspectives on how they view that. And so what we're trying to do is help students see that different people will view the same thing from multiple ways. This is called problem spinning. And so basically it's teaching students in terms of perspective taking, the fact that different people will view a problem in different ways. And so you have a basic problem, and then what are the details of the problem? And then you'll have either a person or a group of people, and that person is going to want everybody else to view something, what that group wants others to believe about the problem and why they want them to believe that. And then you may have an entirely different group looking at that same problem, and they want other people to believe something about the problem and why. So that's problem spinning. And here's an example of that. So two girls get in a physical fight in the hallway between class rotations. Details: Tina and Betty got in a fist fight today in the hall. Tina confronted Betty because Betty was spreading rumors about Tina that were hurtful and untrue. Betty was telling everyone that Tina does drugs. So Tina, what Tina wants others to believe about the fight: well, I don't appreciate Betty telling everybody that I do drugs. And why? Betty, on the other hand, I don't like Tina. She deserves whatever happens to her. And why she feels that way. So that's an example of sort of unpacking the different perspectives on a problem. Self-control, there are several visuals that you can use when you're teaching that. One of these is strategy development. Okay, so strategy development is all about helping students actually develop a problem-solving strategy for solving a particular type of problem. And so what you have here is, what's the problem that the strategy is designed to solve, and how will I know when it's time to use my strategy? And so what we often do when we're helping students develop problem-solving strategies is we'll identify what are the steps of the strategy, which is a really good thing to do, obviously. But what we need to do in addition to that is help students think through those steps in terms of what would be a hot spot or a potential problem that might make it difficult to do this step. So we're anticipating or being proactive in identifying potential hot spots. And then if we run into that hot spot, what are we going to do? What's my plan for dealing with it? And so what's the strategy step? What's a hot spot that I might run into when I'm trying to do that step? And if I run into it, what's my solution? And so we can use these for actually making those steps of the strategy you're developing with students really concrete and helping them think through what it's going to take to implement that strategy. Another tool or set of tools you can use focus on goal setting and self-advocacy. And there are a variety of those here. PROACT is a self-advocacy strategy. So this is self-advocacy strategy. This is a personal profile for identifying strengths and weaknesses. This is all about who controls the problem, what do I want to happen instead, and needs versus desires, and so forth. So we're not going to look at all of these because you can click through and kind of take a look at these and get a sense of what might be useful to you, but we'll look at a couple of them. For example, who controls the problem? With this one, you have what are some specific problems that I may be having or the student, and then things about this problem that I have control over, and things about the problem that I have no control over. So what can I conclude about that particular problem? And so we'll do this for each of the various problems we're dealing with. So poor grades in school. Things I have control over, well, I need to have better study habits and make sure my assignments are turned in. Things I have no control over, well, I'm not doing great at every subject. Some subjects are more difficult than others, and I really don't have any control over how difficult the subjects are. But I do have control over this. Conclusion, I need to work hard to do my personal best. Another problem is poor time management. Okay, what I have control over is I can prioritize things and follow through with my commitments. What I have no control over, there's going to be situations that are unexpected or unplanned, and I'm going to have to deal with them. So you can kind of get a sense of how this works in terms of helping students really think through problem analysis in terms of what they have control over and what they don't. Here's a simple one that I really like, and that's what's happening that's not good, and why is that happening, and what needs to happen instead. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to kind of fly through these, and because you can take your time later, or if you want to pause the video if you really want to study the responses and so forth. But in order to have time to show you different samples, you can also look at these on handouts, and all of the samples are also on the software. Okay, this one is the positive thinking, and it's the power of intentional positive thinking. And so basically it's helping students understand the power of using positive thoughts. So you start with a negative belief about something, and then you add positive thoughts about it that target the negative belief. In other words, private actions that no one can tell that you're thinking. So these are thoughts, and that tends to result in positive behavior. So for an example, a negative belief might be, I'll never get all my schoolwork done. Add a positive thoughts, I've had a lot of work to do before and I got that job done. And so the positive behavior that results is setting a plan of action that will accomplish all the work in a timely manner. I'll never survive this breakup with my girlfriend or boyfriend. Add a positive thought to that. Well, I've had a lot of wonderful people in my life that make me happy. And so the positive behavior is spend time with those in my life that do love and care for me, and so forth. Here's another simple one that deals with goal setting. And so basically, what's a goal and what would be so you can as a result of that if you chain it, thus I need to. And so for an example, a goal would be to get the diploma that will allow me to attend college, and if I do that, that will allow me to take college classes that are interesting and work towards a college education. Thus I need to talk to my teachers and counselor about my options, find out what different diplomas mean, find a college that I could attend, and so forth. So this is just sort of fleshing out some fairly simple goal setting type procedures. So what we've been looking at are just samples of various smart sheets you can use when working with students to target things like behavior literacy and character building and so forth. In part 2 of the video, what we're going to be focusing on is some behavior analysis smart visuals for teachers.